Picture this. You wake up one day in 2026 ready to play your favorite game, Path of Exile. You go straight to YouTube and type Fub Gun Juicing Guide 2026. You follow his build and his advice to a T. Ready to farm, you enter the fortress map. You click on Scarab after Scarab, and then you wonder to yourself, why is 90% of my loot coming from barrels and strongboxes? Why aren't the monsters dropping the loot instead? And why is the only thing I'm picking up scarabs? Well, there's a lot we need to go over to unpack that particular question. Today we'll be going on a journey that starts all the way back in Ultimatum League, brings us all the way to present day, detailing how exactly we got here, because ground loot is a pretty hot topic in modern PoE. Today I'm proud to present to you the Kalandrification of PoE. I really hope you enjoy. Our story begins all the way back in Ultimatum League. For those of you somewhat new to PoE, this era of Path of Exile is extremely different than what you're familiar with today. Just imagine a PoE with no Atlas tree. Path of Exile Ultimatum releases in April 16th of 2021. Many people like to remember this league for how awful the league start was. Ultimatum hands down takes the #1 spot for the worst league launch ever in PoE in terms of server stability and login queues, etc. Anybody who played Ultimatum on League Start knows that it was a long and grueling 12-hour long campaign full of disconnects, login queues, and just overall instability. We were graciously reached out to by GGG and given a streamer priority queue, which in hindsight definitely was not the greatest idea. The whole community was understandably upset because of the server problems that were happening, and this definitely left the player base upset and on edge, ready to complain about any minor grievance they might encounter while playing the game. Our group ended up doing a little bit of exploiting here or there. We got banned. Oops. But that's not really the topic of this video. With the disastrous league start, the streamer queues, and just overall player dissatisfaction over those two issues, definitely wasn't a great time to introduce a league mechanic that favored extremely difficult content in the form of the Ultimatum Waves all or nothing reward system, and players took to Reddit to start to complain about the rare monster spam that existed in this mechanic. Many of the complaints were centered around there just being too many rares, the fights were just too hard to navigate because there were so many rares, so many monsters to keep track of, and it was just overall cluttered. Chris Wilson himself confirms this criticism in a Reddit post titled Some Thoughts from Chris, posted 5 years ago. Chris remarks, the encounters themselves didn't have great combat. They achieved challenge just by spamming a whole lot of rare monsters at you, and it was hard to follow what was going on. In Ultimatum League, the feedback was clear. There's just too much going on, there's too many rare monsters, it was just hard to follow the combat. GGG does what it does best. It takes that feedback, shelves it, comes back for the next league, and makes changes to their beloved game. That's the cyclic nature of the game. With Ultimatum in the rearview mirror, we will fast forward over to Scourge League. Scourge came out 6 months later after Ultimatum and featured scaling risk-reward mechanic, which incentivized you to have very powerful builds. During Scourge League, a popular strategy developed involving Alva and something we like to call Pocket Beyond. In PoE, these league mechanics used to have a historic bonus that affected all league mechanics, Alva being one of them. When you were killing monsters inside of that particular league mechanic, they would get a very, very large bonus applied to them. This bonus was introduced so that monsters were just generally worth killing when you were doing the mechanics, such as Abyss, or in this case, Alva. In order to make the league mechanics feel more powerful and potent, the multiplier that these monsters had on them was, in the realm of like 1,000%, like 10 times more loot. This made it so monsters from those mechanics just generally felt more rewarding than other stuff on the map. And that reward was so potent that people would actually bring in a prophecy called Hidden Reinforcements in order to generate extra monsters inside of the Alva. When you proc the prophecy, it would spawn a monster pack, you would kill the monster pack, and it would spawn beyond monsters. You'd then kill the beyond monsters, and they would all have that 10x bonus from the Alva applied to them. This strategy was one of the mainstays in early MFing, and it really cemented Alva as like the premier mechanic for magic finding at this point in time. The huge focus on killing as many monsters as you can. Killing as many monsters generates a lot of beyond generates a lot of loot. It had a very good cycle going for it. It was a very, very fun gameplay loop to a lot of players at this time. But it's important to take note of this specific historic bonus that existed in league mechanics like Alva, because this historic bonus would become the piece of controversy for leagues later down the line. We need to put a pause on that first, because we need to talk about Archnemesis. Archnemesis came after Scourge 3 months later in February 4th of 2022. Featured a new atlas, including the first iteration of Eater and Exarch, which were very, very cool bosses. It was also the first iteration of the PoE atlas passive tree, which is beloved by many players to this day. So remember all that complaining that players did back in Ultimatum regarding rare monster spam and battle clutter? Well, GGG had a plan, and now it is time to finally reveal the rework that has been promised as a result of all of those complaints in Ultimatum, and that is clearly Archnemesis. It comes to PoE first as a league so that GGG can test the waters, make sure it's suitable for the core game. The idea is simple, right? What if we reduced the amount of rare monsters, but we gave rare monsters powerful modifiers that are memorable, and you're going to have these epic battles with those rare monsters and be rewarded for killing them. Sounds great on paper, right? It was also GGG's first implementation of what we call loot conversion modifiers, a system in which where you kill the monster and it would convert 100% of the item drops to a particular other type of item, such as currency, scarabs, or flasks. During the Archnemesis League itself, there wasn't a huge amount of focus put on the Archnemesis mechanic itself because the base game had so many changes to it with the new bosses and the Atlas passive tree. For many players, Archnemesis kind of came as an afterthought because of all of the other sweeping changes that came to the game. The player sentiment on Archnemesis was kind of lukewarm, stating that generally the mechanic was cool and rewarding, but a lot of the modifiers were generally unbalanced and very untested. A lot of modifiers would just make monsters extremely tanky or unkillable, and others just did way too much damage and just would one-shot hardcore characters. But once again, these problems were kind of overlooked because the base game had received such a fantastic expansion. It was really fine to overlook some of these issues that the Archnemesis mechanic had. Archnemesis comes to a close in May of 2022, and we are excited to see the next league, which is going to be Sentinel League. During the Sentinel reveal trailers, it was announced that GGG was going to fold Archnemesis into the core game, and players were apprehensive at best, but we were promised that a pass was done on all of the modifiers, and all of the problematic ones are going to be receiving balancing, so we were all willing to hold our breath while GGG cooks in the kitchen here. The first initial implementation of Archnemesis into rares had all of the modifiers of Archnemesis, but the same amount of rares that were there before. They also didn't really make the rares super rewarding as a result of adding these new and annoying modifiers to rares. And even though GGG did a balance patch on a lot of these modifiers, there were still some extremely unfun and problematic ones that would later be removed, such as periodic invulnerability.
That's not a good welcome sign for a new player. GGG, what is that?
In general, Sentinel League was full of complaints about rare monster power, as truly a lot of these were really underbaked and untested, unbalanced, and the rares that you were killing were not super rewarding to begin with. So now we just have harder monsters that are more annoying to fight, but without the rewards. Sentinel League in general was kind of the peak of magic finding in PoE, as we had Alva incursions at their strongest, historic League quantity bonuses still intact, crazy Sentinel quantity steroids that provided some of the most fun and crazy moments of magic finding in PoE history. The monsters themselves dropped loot, and you were incentivized to kill as many monsters as you could, and it wasn't just the single rare or unique monster loot pinata meta that we have today in 2026. Every monster was valuable, and every mechanic was valuable, as they had inherent quantity and rarity bonuses. But little did we know this would be the last league we have those. Oh, Kalandra. So let's begin to unpack Kalandra, shall we? Sentinel was a pretty wild ride, and the rare monsters with the new modifiers are pretty overwhelming to the majority of the player base, and it made content generally very difficult, so we need to pull back a bit, right? If you're a GGG in this situation, maybe the best way to keep these powerful rare modifiers in the game is just to reduce the number of rare monsters overall and add even more modifiers to the rare monsters. This in theory will achieve two things, right? The rare encounters will feel harder and make you think about combat more, and when you kill the rare, you'll be sufficiently rewarded for your efforts.
That should drop that? Are you...
That sounds great on paper, right? So let's reduce the number of rares, give them more modifiers, and bring back the loot conversions that existed in the OG Archnemesis League implementation. GGG took this concept into internal testing and ran into a problem, however. When they were implementing those loot conversions, they noticed that sometimes monsters dropped way more loot than intended from the conversions. And upon doing some digging, they found the culprit, that hidden historic bonus which existed existed on League mechanics such as Abyss or Alva incursions. That historic bonus was taking those reward conversions, right? And applying that same maybe 10x multiplier to the conversions that were coming out. If you landed these conversion modifiers inside of an Alva, combined with the way the loot system works, you would most likely be generating hundreds upon hundreds of divines from a single monster loot conversion. And this is obviously unacceptable for the core game, right? We don't want to have people dropping hundreds of divines or whatever when they get lucky in an Alva. It's probably a little bit unhealthy. So the solution here is to, instead of not have the loot conversions in the game, we're going to just nerf the historic bonus that existed on all League mechanics. And we're going to compensate the player by maybe, let's say, increasing the number of item drops globally by, let's say, 30% or so. And then now we can finally implement the Archnemesis loot conversions into the core game. These changes are the genesis of all of the issues that have been plaguing PoE's item drop system for years now. League mechanics were originally designed with this historic bonus in mind to make ground loot feel substantially better than just normal monsters in your map. It was the primary reason why these League mechanics were worth engaging with in the first place. These changes led to a litany of issues, mainly that Archnemesis monsters were extremely unbalanced and your main source of loot, and you were just fishing for those conversions to scarabs or currency when they happened, because it would drop so much currency when you landed the lottery that it was really no point in doing anything else in the game. It also had a knock-on effect that ground loot that doesn't come from Archnemesis conversions is just completely destroyed, and stock League mechanics that aren't juiced up by scarabs are now completely unrewarding when you're looking at it in the context of ground loot. These sweeping changes to League mechanic loot was not announced at all in the patch, and obviously it left players a little bit questionable about what the situation was. The disparity of loot was actually so bad, many people just thought there was a bug, like they just couldn't believe that there was this little stuff dropping in Kalandra. There were other changes this patch which also led to a very, very large reduction in ground loot, mainly the absolute destruction of Beyond as a League mechanic. For any new school players, Beyond used to be the most powerful MFing or ground loot strategy, as it would just generate a ton of extra monsters for you to kill, a lot of unique monsters at that, and unique monsters used to have very, very high multipliers on them, so they were very, very sought after. This isn't a problem now, but the original rework of Beyond made it so that you could spawn a boss instantly after you just killed a couple monsters, which would turn off your Beyond. Obviously, that's not very good. The historic bonus, which existed on all of the Beyond monsters, was removed, alongside all of the other mechanics that had their historic bonus removed as well. It now basically can't spawn unique monsters besides the one boss, which was another nerf, and it kind of left Beyond as an absolute shadow of its former glory as a juicing mechanic. So players going into the Kalandra League knew that, you know, a couple of these things were going to be nerfed, but we really did not know how bad it was going to be. We as League players, you know, started to level up our new characters on the League launch, and we heard some rumblings from standard players that the loot situation was very dire, but oh boy, we were not prepared. The Archnemesis changes being rolled into the core games, with the monsters being extremely overtuned and unbalanced, coupled with the insane reduction in loot coming from all mechanics, on top of the absolute destruction of Beyond, led to a flood of memes that will never be replicated in the PoE community.
It was all a fever dream. There's no hard mode. There was no quantity nerf.
And we can begin to also look at the double, triple, quadruple, and quintuple down that GGG did in regards to this situation. So the player base is extremely on edge at this point, right? They want answers. There's been the biggest shadow nerf to loot in the history of the game. We had some of the biggest crafting nerfs with the re-implementation of Harvest to trade.
Whoa, 1, 2, 3, fire damage!
And we had the destruction of Beyond as a League mechanic. The first thing to address is Archnemesis rares being too powerful. It doesn't really address some of the complaints that the community was having, in that a lot of these mods are underbaked and untested, and the only thing that we're going to get from them is just a reduction of life on Archnemesis rares that are coming out of Essences, Betrayal, and Red Beasts, which wasn't really the problem a lot of players were experiencing, and it felt like a disconnect between the player base and GGG. The next complaint that players were having was about harvest crafting, and that it was just way too RNG to make the items you were having on your builds, right? It was just way too hard for a lot of players. And to address the feedback here, the answer we got was we're just going to be increasing the life force drop rates, with no addressing of the community concerns about the crafts being just extremely RNG and less powerful than they were before. Lake of Kalandra was getting some improvements, but I don't think many people were engaging with the lead mechanic to begin with. But maybe those changes would be good. Everybody was going to wait and see. And we finally arrive at the now infamous historic bonus removal. Chris writes, players report that general item drops feel a lot lower in this expansion. There are two changes we made in 3.19. The first is that the rate of encountering rare monsters from certain league content has been reduced. So you are fighting, killing, and receiving rewards from fewer monsters than before. This is partially offset by rare monsters in 3.19 now being more rewarding than they were before. The second reason is that we removed a massive historic bonus to item quantity and or rarity that applied to some league-specific monsters. We replaced it with a moderate 2 to 3x increase to item quantity to offset the fact that they often have more life than regular monsters and some cannot drop maps. It's once again worth reiterating that the player base had no idea of these changes at the time. They booted up the league, leveled up their character, was experiencing terrible ground loot, and this is the first time we had ever heard about these massive sweeping changes to the way that loot works in the game. This post was received with overwhelming negativity by the PoE community. How could such a massive sweeping change not be communicated in the patch notes to the player? It was, for all intents and purposes, one of the largest loot-related changes to have ever been implemented in the game, and it didn't even receive a passing patch note or anything of the sorts. And a frustration that the community had at the time was that there wasn't any willingness to try and make any changes in that regard. It was kind of just, here's what we did, and this is kind of how it's going to be. The massive historic bonus removal just came as a shock to the general community. It's just, how could they have done this, was the overall sentiment, as you can see from some of these Reddit comments from way back in the day. The next Reddit post to satiate the Reddit dumpster fire would come from Chris in the form of nerfing defensive Archnemesis modifiers, which honestly was a huge W for the community here. A lot of the modifiers were extremely annoying, underbaked, untested, as I keep saying over and over again here, and they ended up nerfing a ton of those modifiers, and these changes were met with much positivity because people really did not like some of these modifiers. With the community still absolutely enraged and the Reddit just on fire at this point, Chris would sit down and write a post to address much of the criticism that GGG is receiving as a result of a bunch of these changes in Kalandra. Let me preface these posts by saying I have the utmost respect for Chris Wilson. In the now infamous What Happened with Items Reddit post, Chris would detail exactly how these changes came about, how these changes affect item drops, and what we're going to be doing going forward. It is the most downvoted Reddit post in all of PoE history, but frankly, no matter what Chris said here, I don't think it could have satiated the absolute blind rage that the PoE community was blinded with at the time. In this post, Chris details a few of the philosophies that are guiding the changes that came about in Kalandra. Chris also detailed the rationalization behind removing the historic quantity and rarity bonuses that applied to league mechanics here. The critical line is here where he says, as described above, various valuable Archnemesis modifier conversion drops in a way that directly benefit from item rarity and item quantity bonuses. When we were balancing and testing this, we wondered why certain league monsters were dropping significantly more items than regular monsters. It turned out this was due to the item rarity or quantity bonuses that were historically applied to monsters to make leagues feel rewarding. When combined with the new drop conversion system, these bonuses stacked exponentially and caused far too many rewards. So in line with philosophy 3, they rebalanced the league monsters so that they were now about twice as rewarding as regular monsters and didn't have these existing bonuses. To be clear, the bonuses were inconsistent and arbitrary. For example, Yellow Beast dropped more items than Red Beast, Incursion monsters didn't have any increased quantity, just increased rarity, and Harvest monsters had both. This also touches on Beyond, saying that it is not okay for 15,000 unique items to drop in the same map. The new version is more reasonable, allowing up to 1 unique Beyond boss per map, which is honestly a gigantic nerf, but it was intentional, and we mentioned in the livestream it was reworked. Chris also expresses regret for not patch noting the item rarity and quantity rebalance changes, which is understandable. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. It's just so hard to catch all of these changes and patch note them properly. But here's where the controversial bits start in Chris's post. Chris said he also overstated the impact of the change when communicating about it in the What We Are Working On post. He said we removed a massive historic bonus and this caused a community to think the impact was larger than it was. The reason why I used the word massive was that the numbers sounded big and viewed in isolation. reduction, but are less impactful when viewed in context. For example, the rarity bonus that was removed from a red beast was 750%. This sounds big, but a 4 mod Archnemesis rare has a 41,000% bonus. Players have been saying we massively reduce drops, throwing out numbers like 90%, but in reality, a large difference could only occur in the most extreme situations involving Beyond Delirium and Incursion stacked with party, quantity, rarity, sextants, and scarabs, and a dedicated MF Cooler. I think he might be singling us out here. Every other player is unaffected on average. For example, when playing Breach, the reduction in currency items found is around 7%. In 100% Delirium maps, the difference hits 17%. In Incursion and regular non-league content, you'll find 25% more. So you have to understand, the whole community is telling GGG that the loot is terrible. They've made a huge mistake. There's a massive amount of FOMO going on because of people culling rare monsters for 70, 100, 150 divine. And poor Chris makes a Reddit post, which is essentially like kind of gaslighting the community, saying that the loot is really fine, which the tidbit about saying that there's X% of reduction of items was really what kind of rubbed the community the wrong way, so to speak, and why this particular post was so frowned upon and heavily downvoted at the time. On the topic of Kalandra, Chris would go on to make one last Reddit post about tool-assisted Pantheon mod farming, which did receive a bunch of community praise, and this would be the last Reddit post Chris Wilson would make for 4 years. With Kalandra in the mirror, we need to take a look at the next league, which is going to be Sanctum, which started in December of 2022, just 4 months after the Kalandra incident. Sanctum fixed a few issues from Kalandra, mainly that loot conversions are now purely random, so there is no telegraphing of what is going to do a loot conversion anymore. So now, in theory, every single rare monster you kill has an equal chance of, doing the loot conversion. This fixes the culling problem that existed in Kalandra. We had more nerfs to problematic Archnemesis modifiers as GGG continues to iterate and bring down the problematic Archnemesis modifiers. And on top of that, rares now spawn with less modifiers than before, so they're not as annoying to kill, and there's not as many problematic combinations for players. Ground loot is still in a dire state, but there's one singular mechanic holding up endgame magic finding or endgame mapping on stilts, and that is going to be enraged strongboxes. Post Kalandra, we are now in a landscape where, on average, league monsters are unrewarding, but there's one way to inject base quantity onto monsters, and that is enraged. You simply use the sextant for 600% base quantity on monsters in the strongboxes, and you add as many strongboxes as you humanly can to your map with the Atlas passives and scarabs. You choose a map with a good div card, and there's still ground loot. Hooray! Game's working great. Thumbs up. But the problem is that this is now the only way you can inject ground loot into your game. We're just holding up the end game on a single mechanic on stilts. We'll now fast forward to the trial of the Ancestors League, which came out in August of 2023. Here we get another pair of stilts to stand on when it comes to endgame farming and juicing. With the Ancestors patch, we got a new toy that is going to be the Speaker of the Dead Atlas Keystone passive. It makes it so tormented spirits in your maps can possess players for 20 seconds, and tormented spirits in your maps cannot possess monsters. For those unaware, touched monsters have a significant quantity bonus applied to them, similar to enraged monsters out of strong boxes. With some clever planning and manipulations of ghosts, a new farming meta arose. It's the same divination card farming strategy as we've seen for many years, but now instead of enraged strong boxes, we have to jam as many tormented spirits into the map as possible and infect monsters with that quantity buff. A common theme you'll see here with a lot of strategies post Kalandra is just players chasing the last remnants of mechanics that haven't had their quantity bonus nerfed yet. First we had strong boxes, then we had ghosts. Later on we're going to talk about rogue exiles. But it kind of does feel like we're drug addicts just chasing the very last mechanics that drop loot in the game. Overall, Ancestors was a very good league for juicers, but the problem still remained. We have a handful of viable ground loot strategies that are just warped around injecting as many monsters with high quantity bonuses into our maps. This makes stock league mechanics on average very unrewarding, but at least there's more than just strong boxes now. We have ghosts. But after Ancestors, we will see the craziest thing that has ever come to PoE. Affliction League came out in December of 2023, and we were absolutely not ready for the clownery that is going to come out of this particular league. GGG really threw out any restraint when making this league. Ghosting was still a strategy of this league, albeit overshadowed by other strategies quickly. Affliction was all-consuming. It didn't matter how bad the base state of the game was, or how unrewarding other league mechanics were, because Affliction was just the absolute craziest thing that PoE has ever seen to this day. Affliction was popular because it made all mechanics viable. It introduced generic item quantity to literally everything, and when you hit a good Affliction, you wanted to kill absolutely every monster in the map. This made previously weak mechanics for ground loot like Abyss viable, once again because it spawns a large number of rares. But now, with the juiced quantity from Affliction, I'm not going to delve too deep on all of the ins and outs of Affliction, but let's just say our resident Fub Gunner dropped something like 25 mirrors raw on his own and farmed around 80 mirrors in that league. Loot was at an all-time high, headhunters were just a couple divines in price, an all-time low. With our dopamine receptors fried, we will move on to Necropolis. With our refractory period not quite recovered yet, Necropolis comes out of left field with a rework to Scarabs and the removal of Sextants. Enraged Strongboxes have been finally removed, and Ghosting has finally eaten a final nerf to knock it out of viability this league. The nerfs aren't so bad though. The Scarab rework brought hope to the magic finders and the juicers of the world because there are so many new combinations to try. Surely I'll be the one to find some super broken strategy, right? It'll be me. I'll be the one that'll find the combination. One Scarab instantly caught every magic finder's eye. And now we need to talk about the Curation Scarab incident. The Curation Scarab let you pick 10 maps of divination cards, having them drop as full stacks, and they let you have 2 of the old generic divination card boosting Scarabs in a single strategy. The Scarab was absolutely one of the most broken things to exist in the league. Later on, players would start to discover how broken Rogue Exiles were in combination with the Curation Scarab, which led to the now infamous 10 mirrors in 1 day video by Fubgun. In Necropolis, Rogue Exiles were injected into the map via All Flames, but players would soon discover just how powerful Rogue Exiles were after experiencing it in Necropolis. We also have our very first taste of the meat sack loot pinata meta when Ben popularized to the community just how stupid unique monster and rare monster modifier stacking plus tormented spirits could get. After Necropolis, yours truly ranted about how I generally disliked the new Scarab system as stock league mechanics felt unrewarding in general, and hyper-specific Scarab combinations multiplied out of control to be too powerful. It becomes a balancing nightmare for GGG, and I still believe that the new Scarab system suffers heavily from this problem to this day. After the dust settles in Necropolis, we will have to move on to the year-long bonanza that is the Settlers League. Settlers started in July of 2024 and was almost open for a full year ending June the next year. We do have a couple massive changes in regards to loot. Item quantity on gear has been removed, but at the time wasn't a big deal as the Glittering Scarab still existed with increased item quantity. This just means you really just had to pay the slot tax on the Glittering Scarab. We also saw the Reliquary Scarab reworked into the Titanic Scarab. Tormented Spirits had their bonuses Kalandrified, which means Tormented Spirits are just basically functionally useless now. The Divination Scarab reworked into the Cloister Scarab, which no longer provides a generic bonus to div card. Divination card drop locations also received a massive rework in regards to their drop location and drop pools. In theory, scrying divination cards will allow you to target farm specific cards on your preferred layout, but there's one catch. You can no longer increase the divination card drop rate relative to other items with the removal of the base divination scarab. So while you can scry whatever div card you want and use it alongside any strategy you are using, your divination card drop rate is significantly lower than it was before. There are strategies with pilfering where you inject a bunch of monsters that drop div cards, but it's a complete random grab bag of div cards and isn't really target farming div cards, which was a thing before. With these changes, the targeted farming of specific divination card set has basically been killed off completely. The last thing to talk about in Settlers League was the Titanic Scarab and how dominant it has been for magic finding and just general ground loot. The Reliquary Scarab replacement has been the only thing holding magic finding together for the past few leagues, basically taking the place of Enraged Strongboxes from earlier leagues. Everything else for ground loot was just kind of bad in comparison. For those unfamiliar, you just stack as many unique monsters in the map with Pandemonium or Rogue Exiles and stack the new pack size chisel, and voila, we have a bunch of loot pinatas monsters running around the map. That's kind of it. You just run from unique monster to unique monster, not caring for a single other thing that is going on, a single other mechanic that is spawning rares, etc. 99% of everything in the map that isn't a unique monster doesn't drop shit, and you find the unique boss or exile and it explodes with uniques like a loot pinata. Titanic has kind of brought back that meta that existed in Kalandra where you're just running to the loot pinata, killing it, and then leaving the map, and then that loot pinata explodes with uniques. And this has kind of been the meta for around a year or two now. But Settlers was the first league where the Titanic Scarab really started to be refined as a strategy, and over the next couple leagues, players will take it to their absolute maximum. We now bring ourselves to the Mercenaries League, which started in June of 2025. We have the same powerful Titanic Scarab that existed before, but it's now juiced up with new toys. Number one, we have the extra party quantity from Mercenaries. For every mercenary in the party, you received basically 50% more quantity, which is half a player. We had new memory maps with pedal abilities, which generated some insane loot explosions and conversions. We also had the discovery of the Rogue Exile Pokeball strategy with ritual vessels. For those not privy to the Pokeball strategy, the way it worked was you can capture giant Rogue Exiles in a non-juiced map, then smuggle those giant Rogue Exiles into a juiced up Titanic Scarab map. Normally when you respawn monsters in a ritual, they have a loot penalty applied to them for each time they respawn. But a small oversight from the devs here is that the loot penalty does not apply to the Rogue Exiles when they are split from being giant. This let you have a massive number of unique monsters to multiply your Titanic Scarabs against, which led to some of the highest loot levels in terms of uniques that we've seen since Affliction. It's worth reiterating here again that all of these strategies require hyper-targeted niche interactions and scarabs to function. Meanwhile, the base game is still unrewarding since Kalandra. While Rogue Exiles took the limelight as the strategy of the league, some new creative farms sprouted up as a result of the scarab changes, some notable shoutouts being the Evolution Shrine farming and Abyss of Hordes. We finally move on to GGG's latest released league, which is going to be Keepers, which started in October of 2025. Keepers is where the years of bad decisions warped around Archnemesis finally catches up with GGG. Some notable changes in Keepers was that the Titanic scaling was cut in half, which is obviously a big nerf to endgame farming and juicers. Additionally, generic map mod effect on the Atlas was cut nearly by half. Additionally, quantity and rarity nodes on the tree were also cut in half. The Evolution Scarab was pretty much gutted. The Rogue Exile inherent quantity and rarity bonus has finally been Kalandrified. Abyss Hordes ate a huge nerf. Tier 17 map modifier bonuses have been nerfed. Risk Scarab has also been nerfed and limited to 1. And then finally, Breach, one of the most beloved mechanics of all of PoE, was reworked into something way more annoying and less rewarding. In terms of ground loot, that is, not speaking about the tree. In Keepers, we no longer had a strategy that holds the game up on stilts. No enraged boxes, no Affliction, no ghosting, no curation scarab, no rogue exiles. The game is finally laid out bare, and the players find that the game is just unrewarding at base level. There's a reason this league was received poorly, and it is the years of decisions that are warped around Kalandra and the knock-on effects that have made us arrive here today. If you don't have a niche strategy and or scarab combination to abuse, what is left is the base game, and the players finally woke up to the reality that the base game is in dire need of help. Ground loot in PoE has been in such a dire state since Kalandra, and has just been going from crutch strategy to crutch strategy because everything at a base level is simply unrewarding. It all started with an idea to try to make rare monsters more rewarding and challenging, and what we got was design decisions warped around that end goal that compromised so many other systems in the game. Looking forward, GG has mentioned they are planning a larger rework to endgame strategies and scarabs, so hopefully we will have new toys to tinker around with and new strategies to explore in the upcoming March League. I've been playing PoE for 13 years now, and I know GGG can always cook up something awesome. I want to thank you all for watching. This video has been a ton of work to put together, and hopefully we'll see you all in 328. Once again, I'm Snap, and thanks for watching.